Well, look, all of you are here because you are brilliant, wonderful behavioral scientists, and we're all here to yell at Jared. So as you hopefully all know, Jared did this fantastic ranking of behavioral science frameworks that caused everyone on LinkedIn to get in a massive fight with each other. And for the different factions of behavioral science to discover that they had real beef with each other, which I love, because Teis and I used to talk about this all the time at Frog. I hate panels where everybody comes and agrees, right? Because what are we saying? If we all agree, like, what is the point of this panel? How are we teaching anybody anything? How are we pushing the discipline further? Pushing the discipline requires disagreement. So what I love and admire that Jared did was cause disagreement in the community so that we could have this productive discussion about, like, what are people like reacting based on. I'll give a really simple example of a fight I got into on one of these threads, in which I discovered that there were applied behavioral scientists who really, really cared that the frameworks were like, had the veneer of academia and peer-reviewed publishing. That was really important to them, even though it's just an imaginary object that we use to try and like design things, that it's not real. We all acknowledge none of these systems actually like exist in the brain as like physical things, but it was really important to them that like it had the veneer of peer review. And I was like, I super do not care about that at all whatsoever, because that doesn't make me make better products because it got peer reviewed. But there were people who felt really strongly. So I love this debate. So I wanted to bring it. So Jared was on the show recently. Most of you have been on the show. I think everybody's been on the show, right? Everybody's episode out. Everybody's been on the show and their episode is out. Yes. Look at it. I'm accomplishing things. So I want you to come for a special episode where we are going to, for the next hour or so, discuss, debate, drink, and have merry with our fellow behavioral scientists talking about frameworks. And so, Jared, I think you should kick us. Like, why did you do this? Why? And did you think it was going to be this controversial when you started?
You know, I'm not sure what exactly I was thinking. I didn't think it was going to blow up as much as it did. And I kind of knew that it was going to be controversial. And I meant to poke and prod at least a little bit. I wanted people to disagree. I wanted to get people debating in the comments. But really what inspired it was sometimes I've worked on projects and I'll try to use a framework that has worked in the past. And it just doesn't work for that context for whatever reason. And sometimes I'm confused. It's like, well, why doesn't it? What is it about this context that makes this framework not usable? And so I hope to provoke some debate where people would be like, well, here's the reason why. And no one had the reason why. And instead it became, debates about personality and the veneer of science and a whole bunch of other things. And it definitely kicked a can of worms that I wasn't quite expecting.
That was lovely. Okay, so other than me, I just started banning people. Like this is when I started blocking people on LinkedIn, where I was like, no, you get a block and you get a block and you're having bad faith arguments and you're just kind of an asshole about this. I didn't block people I disagreed with, but man, if you couldn't have a discussion about this, I was like, boop. And that's unusual for me on LinkedIn. Did anyone else actually, Steph, I think you participated. I saw you comment on some of these.
Yeah, so my experience, I think, might have been a little bit different, Jared, from you and Matt, because it was the framework posts that you wrote and shared. I think you did like in a series, right? You sort of did 1 and then 2 and then 3 and then 4. And then there was this like beautiful summary of all of it. And on one of those, when you were doing the stepwise, I said something like, this is like a really lovely summary of this framework. Similar to this framework is the FOG behavior model. It was a comment I made. And like a bee's nest, like it's just LinkedIn just swore. There was a swarm as a result of that comment I made about the FOG behavior model. And I actually think right around that time, Matt, maybe we got together or we were having lunch or something. And I was like, Matt, what just happened on LinkedIn? Because I had only kind of re-engaged more properly, more actively in LinkedIn after leaving my job. And so I was coming back to the LinkedIn community right around that time, thinking to myself, what just happened? And so I do remember, Matt, I reached out to you. I was like, and it was so fun. In retrospect, it was so fun because those are the kind of conversations we need to be having more, right? And I remember also at one point saying to Matt, like, God, we all need to get in a room, and this is the stuff that makes us all think our best, like it really is like brain fodder for like, how do we get to the next thing? And so I became really grateful for it. But yes, I was in there. But once I triggered that swarm, I sort of backed up just a little.
Backed away slowly.
Smarter than the rest of us.
Uh,
Yeah, before I actually started the LinkedIn post, what the origin of this is that me and Sam Salzer did a version of this that was kind of live, and it was just this fun thing. He was doing a boot camp for his work with Habit Weekly, and he just wanted to do like, hey, let's just do a framework tier list live with the people who are in the class, just as a kind of fun thing. And I remember saying while we were doing that, that COM-B and the fog behavioral model were the two most controversial frameworks in the field, and that if you want to start a fight, those are the two you would talk about. And there was like someone in the comments that was like, well, I don't understand. Why is that? I was like, I don't know how to say this. I just know that it is true. And I was spot on. Those were the two most controversial.
Chloe Hamman, like, let's start with those two. Shall we go to the most controversial first? I like this. All right. COM-B first of all, I'll start with I can't tell the difference between these two models. I swear to God, they're the same thing, explained slightly differently. But they don't seem to be saying anything different about the cognition of humans. Chloe, do you think that can you explain the difference between these two? This should be a game show.
I was going to say, Jared, I love that you did this. When I was early on in behavioral science at Culture Amp, our CEO asked me to like create a behavioral science model as if I could just do that. And I was like, sure. Anyway, when we reviewed them, and I wish I'd had your posts at that time to go through, because I looked through all of them and I was like, I remember looking at Mindspace and being like, this is just too hard. But those were two that I had looked at, and I was like, to me, they are the same. The fog model is slightly more detailed in how I like the way that you can like talk about it, like applying it. So I hadn't seen the version that you had of the action line with the motivators and that put in there, which I don't think the COM-B has it. But to me, like capability, opportunity, motivation, ability, it's all the same cognitive model. So I only came late to the party on reading the comments on LinkedIn, actually, because I haven't been that present. So I was doing sort of a bit of a speed read last night, and I don't know why there's controversy, but yeah. But I do think I was going to say I love that you did it. Maybe I'm jumping ahead, Matt, but I really did understand what you were saying around the difference between something that's a tool and something that's a process in terms of
yeah. So this is,
I mean, neither of them are particularly great at being processes to help you work through a problem. They're more like, once you're looking at the behavior, how do you then start to understand it and make sense of it?
Yeah. This is something Teis and I worked a lot on at Frog, where people always want to talk about the cognitive model, right? They want to talk about like, how do we think about the brain, system 1, system 2, all the things, right? And we're like, nah, man, like first do A, then do B, then do C, then do D. Like the science part of behavioral science more than like the sort of like, because, I'm famous for using the SIDE model, right? Strategy, insights, design, evaluation. This mostly comes up in insights, right? It's how you sort of capture why people are doing it today or not doing it today. You honestly could swap in most of these and it wouldn't, each of them is a valid way of interpreting how people are doing it today that would lead you to slightly different design results, but wouldn't meaningfully change the steps you did. So this is, Jared, to my mind, this is a cognitive model ranking, not a process model ranking.
Yeah, I mean, that gets into a whole can of worms as well, because what's considered a model, what's considered a framework. I use the term framework, but other,
Didn't
a
use
lot of
that.
these are, yeah, we call them models. And I don't think they're models because we're not really describing human behavior. I mean, the frameworks I'm covering, we're not talking about system one, system two. We're not talking about the actual cognition. What we're talking about is, or what these frameworks are trying to do is either diagnose behavior, or once you've diagnosed behavior, map the issues you've found to the potential solutions. And so that's why I consider this more framework than model.
Yeah. And maybe even more, I don't know if this is like making it worse, but I put the fuel and friction model on top of those three, and I was like, they're the same to me. Like, just Fogg puts it on a graph, and Dan Ariely does it in a rocket ship, and other people do it on scales. And I'm like, to me, they're cognitively telling me the same thing, that there's like pressures, one goes up, one goes down. You've got to get them balanced if you want action. And that's what all three of them tell me. So I was like, oh, okay.
Chloe, I'm interested when your CEO came to you and said, make a behavioral science model. Was he talking about a did he have in mind a cognitive model? Or did he have in mind a process model?
He had, so I said, show me an example of where you've seen this, classic, when you don't know what it is, you go, show me an example, tell me what this might look like. Um, and he showed me one that looked like a process model. And I get, given we're a product company, that makes sense. But there was cognitive elements because he showed me mind space as well and said, oh, I really like this, how it talks to some of the psychological factors. So can you, kind of do something that does both? So I ended up maybe further down the track, but building more of like a cut, which I think, Jared, you said right in one of your last posts, like the customized version is the best. So mine is the one I use at Cultram at least is like a mismatch. Because I do that, I hack things and I like kind of layer them on, like I'm putting the rocket fuel over Foggs's model. So that's sort of what I did. And it seemed it did the trick at least, but yeah, it wasn't an easy undertaking.
Eden, I saw you laughing at they're all the same goddamn model. What was what was going on for you there?
Well, it's also the like make a framework. I've definitely had that. Like, we're bringing you in and you're gonna make our behavioral science framework. And it's like, I am not gonna make it from scratch. Like, I'm gonna pull on what's out there. And so I think, like, I agree, the sort of like customized version, everything like that is like really where it ends up. Because yeah, similarly, I feel like for me, like combi, friction fuel, and fog are just really trying to get at like some of those like the diagnostic stuff, do they have skills, capability, opportunity, motivation. But even though they're in combi, I feel like they're kind of represented again across all of them. And so it's like that is something like I'll use early on and stuff, but it's not the only thing I use. Like, it's definitely then like I transition into like other frameworks. So I think that's just, it was pretty funny because I've definitely been asked to just make a framework.
But if we all think these are more or less the same thing, Teis, like why are they so controversial? Like why do people argue about combi versus BMAP if we all sort of like if look, represented in this group of 6 people is a fucking lot of private sector experience at doing this shit. Like, let's conservatively, could we say probably got 30, 40 years here, which in behavioral science terms is a really long time. Why do you think this is so argumentative, Teis? Like, why do people have opinions about this?
I think you've asked the wrong person this question, Matt, because I truly, I also just am like, whatever helps you get to the end, like use that, and it like doesn't actually, I don't know. I'm not a purist, and so, but I do believe there are people who have been using a model, like were taught that model, and then have found success using that model, and then will, defend that model to the end and get excited about it. And so I think that's where it comes in. And then there's like the whole academic layer on top of that, right? Like people can get really excited about p-values and like if is it replicable, and like did you actually test this model, and what is the basis for all these. I mean, in the end, I'm more interested in the debate that Chloe is bringing up of like less one model over another. And actually, Jared, I think you placed models side by side that sometimes have never been side by side, right? And I think like combi and fog are often placed side by side because people see a lot of comparison similarities with it. But like one that like popped out of the the like summary that I was reading is that opportunity solution tree. And I'm like, that is like such a different just like frame. And that's more like process frame over like a think deeply about what is going on in people's brains and like what are the, you know, fundamental elements of cognition that we need to be unpacking here. And so I learned something reading the opportunity solution tree, but I was also like, this is a weird inclusion in this list, which is otherwise talking about like quite precisely how should we go about unpacking and thinking about the brain. So like I think like I don't know, Matt, your catchphrase of like behavior as an outcome, science as a process, right? Like behavior as an outcome is what a lot of these things are like focused on, right? Is like trying to understand what is the insight that leads to that behavior. And some of them instead are on the science as a process element, right? Like how do you actually go about understanding and documenting and clarifying for a whole team, like what is the behavior you're going for and how to get there. So I don't know. I dodged your question, Matt. I think I'm the wrong person to answer because I won't defend one of them.
No, I thought it was good. I thought it was good. Go, Steph.
Yeah, I'll jump in. I loved that. Thank you. So full disclaimer, I spent years at Stanford with BJ in his lab. I am a regular user of his model. And so it's very important that as I say what I'm saying, that people know that about me. I do have a little bit of a bias. So to your point, you know, you learn certain things, you develop expertise and mastery with certain things. And Jared, this is one of the reasons I was so thrilled with your lens of usability. Desperately, desperately needed. And when you think about usability, whatever tool you're using is only as good as it is useful and usable, period, full stop, end of story, right? And so that lens, I think, is what enabled a very healthy debate and a very exciting discussion. So I'm really grateful about that. The second thing that the word I just heard that we've got to probably talk about a little bit is purist. Behavioral sciences as an industry field is very young still. And as a result of that, so many people who practice came from academia or have a very pretty decent background doing academic work. There are many who really pride themselves on and feel strongly about being more purist, pure scientists, which is great, right? And I think some of that positioning and that POV is what causes the energy, right, around BJ. I actually have a really close friend and colleague who I work with all the time. Many people know her, but I have flat out talked with her about the energy around BJ's work for years because she and I fall on completely different sides of the coin. She's very anti, and I'm pro. And what she's taught me over the years in terms of her position and her perspective is that she struggles because she feels like that he packages a message and a tool that's devoid of real world complexities like context and social determinants and things like that, and that he sells behavior change in an oversimplistic manner. I think people who are more purist in the form of science might say that BJ Fogg is a great marketer, but he's not a scientist. And that really is quite offensive to a lot of people who do science as their job and as part of their living. And then also, of course, Matt, you mentioned this at the beginning, which is like, show me the scientific peer-reviewed publications. And that there's not enough meat there for me as I'm pretending I'm a purist, right? Like the traceability is lacking and therefore it doesn't have the cred that the others have, right? Now you could flip that completely on the other side of what I just said to say, well, some of the ones that have a ton of traceability and heaps and heaps and heaps of peer-reviewed scientific publication, where's the real world viability? Where's the evidence that once you actually apply this thing, it generates the behavior change that you're looking for in the real world. And so I think this beautiful tension between academic and applied is probably what is at the heart of what a lot of people have been debating. And, you know, at the end of the day, it is on us as a field to be better at translating our science and, frankly, coming up with design tools that enable us to enact the changes that our clients and partners and everybody who we're serving want to see.
Yeah, there's that D word, that design word, I think is an important one. You know, Jared, you know my favorite, right? Like I like competing pressures, right? Best instantiated here by like Lewinian field theory, which I love that he was like decided to name that after himself as if it were, you know, you're like, yeah, there are pros and cons, man. And he's like, yeah, no, Lewinian force fields. I'm like, okay, sure, man. So, you know, there's it's the fact that we call the fog model, like there's a healthy amount of ego mixed up in all of this. But I love the design word. I love the usable word. And the reason, Jared, I love that one is it's infinitely usable. I can explain it to anybody, anywhere. They can start using it immediately. Is it the most nuanced model in the world? Fuck no, right? But does it like get people over the line of doing the thing that I want them to do? You know, Teis and I used to talk a lot at Frog about the moving from a binary to a continuous spectrum of behavior and science, right? People think of science as like very binary. It's either science or it's not. But really, like science is like a continuum, right? If I could, you know, large samples are better than small samples, right? Like certain, you know, methodological things are liable to give you better answers than other things, but you may not be able to do them because, you know, you can't do a random assignment. I can't random assign investors to have daughters, so I have to do a pre-post, right? It's not as rigorous, but like, hey, it's what I can do. So it's like this continuum of science and continuum of behavior that maybe these frameworks are trading off. You know, Jared, did you go in when you started thinking about how to rank these at the beginning? Because you had the very difficult task of you had to assign tiers to these things. I also, by the way, love that you use like gaming tiers. Like there's no like 1 to 5 scale. It's just like S tier, A tier. I'm like, all right, we're talking about like weapons on Fortnite now. Did you have a framework for evaluating the frameworks at the beginning? Like it's, you know, this criteria, this, you know, usability, explainability, whatever? Or did that sort of emerge as you started looking at them? Or how did you get to the ranking version?
I absolutely did not have a preset criteria. In fact, what I consider this tier list is like, I think it's completely unfair to rank frameworks because they're not all trying to do the same thing and they have different advantages. So, I mean, I'll push back a little bit on what we've been saying that they're all the same thing because I think there are subtle differences that matter.
Well, some of them are definitely not the same thing. Combi, BMAP, I will fight anyone to the death on the fact that those are exactly the same thing. Like they're just using different adjectives. But like some of these are very definitely different. Some of them I'd never heard of. We had 40 years of experience between us here. Had anyone seen this psych framework curve? I'd never seen this in my life. You've seen it, Teis?
Yeah, I've seen it. Yeah. I feel like, Jared, you had to like look for that one though and be like, come on, guys.
It gets pushed by people. Like sometimes you'll be working for a company and they're like, oh yeah, the psych framework, that's what we've been using. And you're like, well, that's not really behavioral science. It's not really.
Let me just level that up
change.
For you real quick. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. But yeah, I mean, the purpose of this tier list wasn't so much here's the objective ranking, because I think that's just a completely unfair task to begin with. It was more trying to figure out what are the dimensions that matter? Why do people disagree about this? Because like I knew that there was tension about COM-B and the fog behavioral model in particular, and people had very strong opinions about those. But what exactly is it? What are those dimensions? And like sometimes I think it's completely arbitrary things like the aesthetics of science. You know, like the elephant path model doesn't have the aesthetics of science, and so people are like, well, let's not use that one. And fog behavioral model, well, he's a good marketer, so maybe it has the aesthetics of marketer more than it has the aesthetics of science. And so people have, rebel against that. But also, like, sometimes categories just work better for one person or another. Like I'm trying to think of one off the top of my head, but if you're grouping motivation together as a single construct, what are all of those things? And if someone just has motivation, do all of those things come to mind? If someone groups something like I put self-determination theory on there, which is kind of cheating because it's not really a framework. But you have, what is it? Is it autonomy, mastery, purpose, whatever the three constructs are? Those don't make intuitive sense for me in the way that they're organized. And sometimes I'm like, well, what about this other thing? How does that fit into self-determination theory? And they're like, oh, well, it just fits in this other thing. I'm like, no, it doesn't. Like that category that you've just invented is nonsense. And so sometimes it's just like completely arbitrary things that don't really matter. But if it doesn't work for you, it doesn't work for you.
It is every once in a while. Look, I try and think of promoting and inhibiting pressures as like the easiest possible version of this. But again, if you push on it at an extreme, some of those inhibiting pressures where you're like, it's sort of also like at the extreme, it's a promoting pressure. Like if if you turn up the volume on it loud enough, it sort of flips the side that it's on. Or, it like cost is generally an inhibiting pressure, except when it's a signal of quality, which is a promoting, like some of these do get sort of nuancy. I mean, Chloe, you had essentially the same challenge as Jared in terms of trying to find a framework that worked. When you were digging through all these frameworks, did you find ones that you were like, that's ridiculous, that's just ridiculous? Or how did you evaluate which ones to bring into your mishmash model?
Yeah, I mean, I think, and I was thinking about this when I was reading Jared's post, like a lot of it depends on, I think, what you get, what understanding of behavioral science you've wrapped your head around first. To some extent, puts a framework for how you see the world and how you evaluate others. And also, I guess, how you've understood concepts in the past. I come from like a psychometric background, so I had like that, of course that impacts, but I've got I would say a strong understanding of individual differences. So I didn't need a model to tell me that there are individual differences in humans that you need to look out for. But I needed other things with the model to tell me. So that's what I was looking for, more like the gaps in my knowledge. The other thing was I knew I needed to teach product teams this. So I was like, okay, I need to teach product teams that don't have any, very little behavioral science or psychological background. How can I do something that makes them understand? And also they were coming from if you say, and like product teams I work with now, they're coming from a state of like problem solution build. Like that's it. Maybe some user testing. So I was like, how can I get them to like just put a little bit of science in there, just a little bit of like testing our assumptions. What's the easiest way I can get there? And so that's what I was going for. And so I went for what's something that can give them like a process, so they just know where to start. They're not looking at something and being like, I don't understand motivation or ability or capability. I'm going to try and make up what these things are, and then I'm too busy. I'm caught up in the behavior. So I was like, how can I get them to just start with what are you actually trying to do? So like the behavior part. And then when it came to how do you start to think about what's going on in people's brains, I was like, how do you give them something that they can understand like really easily? And so I actually, one that wasn't on there, I looked to the science model, which is kind of like an extended version of easy and a not as good version of the 15 make it easy one. And I made a mismatch of those. In hindsight, if I had discovered 15, I don't know when it was made, I would have used something like that. But I just wanted something like really quick. So they go, there's more things I need to think about here. I'm not going to make my assumption that, for example, punishment is the way people respond. Like people came from their different frameworks. So I was trying to go, how can I get people to think about, they will have come from very different understandings. Some of them have maybe read System 1 and System 2. Some of them have maybe read about intrinsic motivation, all these theories that I don't love. How can I get them to think there's something else out there that's fun and easy, and that they can use, and that doesn't look overwhelming because they're already overwhelmed product teams. And that's still kind of the philosophy that I use when I'm teaching product teams. I'll go through that. So not easy, but my criteria leaned heavily into usability and teaching other people and how to just get them to move a little bit more into the science thing. And I'm not a purist. I was like, just add a little more testing in there. I don't care if you're not doing the full, I know you do like 12-week, 14-week sprints. And I was like, for some product teams, that is like mind-boggling, that I cannot spend that much time. And I'm like, okay, if you're doing a day, let's get you to a week.
Right.
Or something like that.
Yeah.
So,
I think that's a really important thing that we should spend a minute on, which is for our field. every behavioral scientist that walks into an industry or applied setting, remember, you are the product. You are the thing to represent our field. And so whatever framework you feel comfortable with, that you feel expert with, that you feel really comfortable rolling up your sleeves and working with, is one you should use. To Chloe's point, when all of a sudden you find yourself in the middle of a sprint with cross-functional and multidisciplinary teams and product people pulling out their hair, and all the realities of what it's like inside the pressure cooker for these teams that just have to build and ship and build and ship and build and ship. You got to be ready for every curveball, right? Versus, wait, what was that one component of that one theory that I thought I knew, but I don't really know, right? And so give yourself permission to use the thing that matches your training and your background and the way that you sort of navigate around the world, so that you can be the most confident expert in that room when you're there, right? And it's okay to say, like, I'm not really sure about that, or I thought this was going to work, but we might have to tweak it a little bit. Like Chloe said, like, I'll just mishmash if I have to, when I'm in that situation. That's okay to do that, right? And I think that that's a very important part of our field, continuing to bolster the value that we bring to industry.
And that's kind of why I did the opportunity solution tree, which, to Theis's point, it's completely different than all of the other ones. It's more, I don't even think of it as a process framework, because it's not even getting into like, hey, here's how to run experiments and then scale or anything like that. Instead, it's telling you how to develop a framework is really what it's doing. It was my kind of cheating way of getting custom frameworks in there, is what it was. And that's why it's completely different than all the other ones. I think it pairs really well with the Make It framework. With you have these 15 strategies, and you can use the opportunity solution tree to kind of figure out, okay, which of these strategies do I care about in this particular context? And the tree kind of gets you down to that level.
Yeah, there's a speed piece of that for sure, Jared, right? Some of these are, I really am just trying to zoom to the end. I don't have time to do, if you look at something like the Make It framework, you have there's no insights. You have no understanding of why the behavior does or doesn't occur. You're just like, well, here are the classic reasons that things do or don't work. So let's just, going to machine gun 15 things at it, and probably one of them will work based on the odds ratio of why humans across large numbers are fairly predictable. Like, there's, to Steph Habif's point, there's a time for that. You got 30 minutes to come up with something, like, probably this is better than you just making up something. It has some rigor to it. Is it as good as you doing a 12-week side sprint where you very carefully determine what the behavior is and then figure out, always, never, sometimes, started, stopped on why it's working, no, of course not. But it was 30 minutes. What are you going to do? What are you going to do?
Yeah.
You work in a really high volume environment, Eden, at times. How often are you doing we don't really have time to do as much as we want to do here. Here's a best guess answer, versus a more rigorous sort of version of a thing?
Yeah, I mean, there's sometimes where you just fall back to defaults. I mean, and working in healthcare, I think what is so important, for some of the models versus others, is I think the reason a lot of their struggle with some of those of them is the difference of a single action versus sustained habit change. And I think with some of my work, it's both, how do we drive an initial screening, but then how are we also getting people to be adherent to medication, or, manage their diabetes? And those are such different things, and naturally should require different frameworks be considered. But I think, elephant in the room is, I'm interested, how is this group using AI to make sure and pull from the things? Because I think what's been helpful for me is, and I think even what some of us are saying is, we're making customized, mishmash things that we're pulling from different elements and stuff. But what in that process is inherently biased? Because are we just pulling what we think is important from different frameworks, and are we missing some of the elements that are really crucial to it? And so the only reason I bring up AI is it's sort of you know, you can train it on these different frameworks and then kind of have it as an assistant that's sort of saying you know, am I using all relevant aspects? And so, yeah, just, I think, there's, you know, there's different, it wouldn't make sense, I think, for like one framework to rule them all, I guess, because I just think that at different times you're dealing with very different behaviors.
Yeah, I think it's a really valuable, you know, the sustained behavior versus momentary behavior one does not get talked about often enough. And, you know, it is a different outcome to design for. There's a huge difference between designing for getting somebody to do something once, in which, like, you know, even if you take something simple like COM-B, well, like, motivation, I can eliminate motivation. I just pay you to do it, right? I only need you to do it once, but like, you don't have to be intrinsically, I know, Chloe, you hate that word. You don't have to be intrinsically motivated at all. I will just literally like spam the promoting pressure, and then it's all inhibiting pressure all the time, right? I just got to make it as easy, you know, I got to worry about the C and the O part, and I'll just spam the M part, and then like, off you go.
But I think that's some of the struggle with, like, I think people's feelings on fog and COM-B is that because haven't thought about context, in what way are they furthering really negative behaviors? Like, you know what I mean? They're just really pushing frictionless, making it easier. But now you have Facebook and TikTok and all these algorithms that have made it so damn easy that now the whole world's digitally addicted. So it's, at what point are we also thinking about the ethics behind some of these? And that's a big one.
That'd be an interesting lens on
Yes.
it, Jared.
Yes, and yeah,
ethics.
I was about to say yes, and that's true about everything in the world, right? Like, everything that comes forward that's new and novel is always going to have two sides. You're 100% right. I agree 1000% with what you said. And you know, it's going to happen.
Jared, I like this. I want an ethical ranking of the frame. Which one is which one is least likely to create negative externalities, like to be used? Because some of the ones that are the most powerfully, when used right, are also the most capable of being used wrong, right? Like, you know, require the most sophistication, require the most nuance, to Steph's point, require knowing how to use it really well. And so if you take the sort of AI version of it, man, you can really go astray really fast when you get there.
Yeah. And some people have criticized Fogg in particular for this because of he's closer to Silicon Valley.
Right.
And so some people are like, oh, Silicon Valley is the worst. And obviously they're using the Fogg model more than these other models. Therefore, he's to blame. And I think that's such an unfair argument. But it just drives me insane that anyone would make this argument. It's no, all of these models are talking about the same exact principles. There's nothing particularly novel about Fogg's framework that makes it unethical. None of these frameworks have an explicit ethical component built into them. It's not like you go to COM-B and it's increase motivation, except these types of motivation, because that would be unethical, right? Like, you go to a different, like, there are ethical frameworks that you might turn to. Yeah, I mean, there's so much we could say about ethics, but none of it is embedded in the frameworks themselves.
Yeah, 100%. It was a huge part of why I left academia. Was I had this conversation where I had published a paper, and I talked to a company, and they were essentially going to use it for the opposite of what I had published, right? So I had published a paper that was sort of would move people in a particular pro-social direction that happened to be anti their business model. And they were like, oh, we could just do the reverse, and then people will do our thing. And I was horrified. I was like, just aghast at this, like, oh yeah, once you put it out, like, it's out, man. You know, you make a framework. Chloe makes the mishmash framework. She publishes out. It's super powerful, but now, you know, the cigarette companies are using it to get people addicted. And that just gets really hard. Teis, you have taught this to a unique, you know, Chloe and Steph talked about, man, I got to get product teams in a live environment to do this thing at scale. You've done this in a really, you know, because you did a ton of the teaching at Frog. You taught a lot of the cohorts. You brought a lot of designers along, and you have a strong design background, probably stronger than you know, certainly than I do. Do you think that some of these are better designed, worse designed, easier to use with designers, worse to use with designers? Like, I love that D word. Like, give me a D word ranking.
Yeah, I think short answer is yes. I think there's different, I mean, my design brain immediately goes into what are the use cases for these frameworks, right? And we've already mentioned multiple use cases. One of them is which one sells well in the 500 audience auditorium to quickly frame up how do we think about behavior change, right? Because there's so many misunderstandings around that, right? And some of it is like the use cases I know the behavior I want to do. Now give me like a solution space of 50 different ideas that I can like read quickly and use as a checklist to see which ones might be most appropriate, right? And so I think like some of these serve different use cases for different purposes. I actually think, not to drag us back to like minute 2 of this conversation, but I think like the FOGB and the fog model and COM-B debate in some sense
Can
is
we just call
actually
it the
just a
Fogby
question of
model
like
from now on? Like, I think
the
that
FOGB.
portmanteau goes just fine.
Exactly. I actually think the difference there is more on just like in those two use cases, if we agree that the basic frameworks behind them are pretty similar, then my interest is like how do they work in both of those two use cases? Like how do they work in the auditorium where you're just trying to get people to like think broadly about the overall frame here? And I think fog works better in that auditorium setting than COM-B because COM-B takes too long to go all the way around the circle and distinguish each of the different slices of that circle and try to understand like how to do that. And then the nuanced understanding of the checklist approach of like, how do I actually come up with interventions under each of these is like even more work, right? Whereas fog immediately kind of caters a little bit better, I think, to both of those audiences. I think it caters slightly better to that 500-person auditorium with some of the like analysis you were sharing, Jared, right? With like, how do you shift on this graph and how do you think about where prompts work and don't work and stuff like that? There's just like more nuance that you could easily quickly get into. And it starts prompting you to think about like, what are the actual interventions that like work a little bit better? So, I mean, yeah, I'm happy to like put a very soft stake in the ground that COM-B has never been particularly useful for me in my work. And that's less to do with the fact that it's probably very complete and it's probably very useful in terms of thinking about it, but I just don't turn to it. Like I don't look up COM-B unless the client tells me first, hey, we work COM-B, and then I look it up again and remind myself what all the different terms are, and then I use it to explain it to them, right? But otherwise, I don't find it a useful framework for me to like talk big picture behavioral science, what are we in the business of doing, or very specifically, like what are the behaviors and how are we shifting them?
I'd love to find out from everybody in this group which ones they're using these days in their practice. Do you have go-to frameworks or models that are your go-tos that you regularly use? Forget about the client, forget about the context just for a second. Like, what's in your toolkit?
You know me, right? So it's
Matt, gee, I wonder what you're using.
Yeah, it's all competing pressures because it's the thing, but it's almost entirely for the thing that Teis said, which is it is the easiest jump-starty way for me to get people from zero to something, right? It is hard to use wrong. It's pretty intuitive. I can explain it in 20 minutes. I could do the M&M exercise in 20 minutes and people very intuitively get it. I did it earlier today for about 200 people at Walmart, and like, in an hour you can really get people to like, oh man, I can transform the way that I do this thing. And I don't know there's any other one on this list. Now, to be fair, you said something earlier. I don't think maybe it wasn't you, Steph. I think it was you, Chloe. Are you the one who said the first thing you get exposed to is the one that's
Yeah,
so
that was me. Yeah.
so I didn't get exposed to it as Lewinian field theory, but my first academic publications were on how cognitive load changes the salience of promoting or inhibiting pressures, right? So meaning when people are under load, it causes whatever pressure is more salient to then dominate the other pressures. And so because that was the way my first sort of academic flailings were explained and the way that I explained the world, it has become, to your point, Steph, the most intuitive thing for me to be able to explain to something else. But there's some alternate universe maybe where COM-B was the thing that got explained to me first, although I think it came about after I came out of school. But, it was the younger Matt Wallaert, maybe that got explained to me first and I would be equally adept at explaining it. But after, 20 years of using the same thing, if any of you have ever seen me, Teis has seen me do it, like, I'm real fucking good at explaining, promoting, and inhibiting pressures, man. Like, you know, I can generate examples on the fly and I could do the thing. And to your point, Steph, that's 90% of it is it's just teachability for me. All right. So I'm in Lewinian field theory and the rest of these can all go to hell. I'm going to go down to my left. Chloe, like,
I'm not too dissimilar from you. I was gonna say there's a couple of tools that you like tools that I pull out with product teams all the time, and I use behavioral mapping. I use that a lot, and I just find that's really easy to get to the behavior because I'd love them to be really good with, be like, oh, we've got a strategy and we've really thought through this. Most of the time, I'm like, okay, tell me what you want to change. We do a behavioral map, and they're like, that's not actually what we're looking at. We don't want just sign-ons. We're getting stuck here. So I use a behavioral map, and then I use either 3Bs or promoting inhibiting pressures or fuel or friction as like, okay, this is what we need to look at now to understand it. And then I'll pull out whatever, like I said, I'll probably start using 15, make it 15 as more of kind of a checklist to like remind myself. But I'd love an AI tool that does that a bit better for me because I think I am now going to my like defaults and I'm like, oh, how many things am I missing when I'm working at pace and I'm just going to what I know. But I can't ignore a behavioral map and promote inhibiting pressures or fuel or friction. Yeah.
Eden Brunel.
I'd say like, well, I grew up and I read Amy Boucher's book, and that was me really getting into the field, was her releasing that, and that was just such a, I can always be a fangirl for Amy. That book just like kind of changed my life. It's like, what am I doing here? So I'd say I definitely use a lot of COM-B. I like the 3B framework as well. I went through the Rational Labs like boot camp. I've kind of like, so I feel like those ones are sort of in the beginning phase of like, what are the barriers, things like that. I feel like self-determination theory is definitely one I use though. Really in the more like in the how do you sustain long-term behavior change? So just kind of thinking of like, are there aspects of that, of autonomy, competence, relatedness, that like if it's a long journey, you can bring those aspects into like sort of a diabetes management. And then more recently, definitely been using the Make It toolkit. I went through their training as well and kind of did like a thing with some of the team. And I feel like that one, when it comes to actually like turning those insights into strategies, that's what helps me there. Mm-hmm.
Jared Peterson, point of order, sir. 3Bs is not on here, right? But is that because it's just more or less Lewinian field theory?
Yeah. And same with friction and fuel, which was created by my colleague now, Aline Halsworth. It just has so much overlap with Lewin that it's like I could have, especially friction and fuel, because it breaks down things even further and has these subcomponents, and so it probably maybe would have been worth it. But it was the basic idea that you have promoting pressures and inhibiting pressures, so I just kind of it's all kind of roughly the same.
Yeah. Got it. All right, Steph Habif, what do you? I mean, you already called out your biases.
Yeah, I do. But so my toolkit. So to take a page out of your explanation, Matt, there's this stuff that was all grad school and academic life that I still carry with me in my industry life. Whether it's change, stages of change, health belief model, theory of planned behavior. Yes, I'm happy to talk about all of those. I don't find them very applicable. They're not super useful and usable for, everyday translation. So in my toolkit, when I'm in industry, it's the fog behavior model, the hooked model by Nir Eyal. I'm a big user of that. The one carryover from academia that I use very regularly is social cognitive theory, Bandura. That's a big one for me. I use that very regularly. And then Matt, your stuff, the SIDE framework. And then because I did a lot of time at the D school at Stanford, the design thinking framework is very, very easy to just organize groups, right? Organize people and give them like a linear stepwise, like, big picture, this is how we're going to go about doing it.
That makes a ton of sense, right? That process model piece, used a word we haven't used a lot, which is group. A lot of the times there's a big difference between like, I am trying to explain this to Teis and I'm trying to explain this to 12 Teises at the same time all of them with different knowledge levels and different goals and outcomes and motivations and things. And so you're almost at a meta level, we're always looking for the like, well, what's the thing that the people in the room in general can use,
Right.
even if somewhere in there, there might, there's an Eden, she's brilliant. She probably could do something way different, but like, I can't teach to the highest common denominator because the Matts of the world are going to be like, what's going on?
Yeah, the rest of the room is Teis's. Is that what you're saying, Matt? Yeah.
I just said,
I heard
no,
that.
I said there were brilliant Edens, lots of Teises, and some idiot Matts. I very clearly made myself clear. It's all good, Teis Jorgensen. What are you using these days in your post Frog life? You just came out of government too, so you had a very interesting set of people you needed to teach to do this.
Yeah, I mean, my blend of practice, I feel like continues evolving, and I've started hashing some of that out on LinkedIn posts recently as well, just to try to like start making sense of what is the mix of theories.
By the way, I love that, and I hope everybody does that. I think using LinkedIn to sense make is like one of my newest, favoritist ways to use LinkedIn.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I'm getting a lot of value personally about it, just to like reflect in a moment of transition as well, around what the best things that I pulled. I mean, it's interesting, Chloe, hearing you say behavior mapping, because my professional experience starts at Ideas 42, and they had like a very specific frame around what like a behavior map was. And so that informed a lot of it. And that was like deeply steeped in academia and trying to translate insights from academia into like driving, better social change, particularly in service design. And so I still carry a little bit of that like heft from academia of just like the different theories and trying to like find them in the real world, and using that a little bit as just like a checklist that I go through whenever I'm like faced with a problem, and I'm like, hey, have I really thought about this from the 17 different ways that I could be looking for solutions on? So I do a fair amount of that, and then my practice is very much steeped in the promoting inhibiting pressures stuff as well. I mean, I've just now taught that to over 200 people, and so it's just it kind of, yeah, similarly comes very easily, and people get it, and then you can move on. Like I feel like you can kind of get people on the same page, understanding promoting inhibiting pressures. I think the value of that as a framework, Matt, disappears in the 20-minute long debates we have around, is this really a promoting pressure or a lack of inhibiting pressure, right? And then we have a lot of fun, over drinks debating that. But at the end of the day, like that comes from a bunch of other knowledge and theories that we are carrying around with us in the background that the basic model doesn't actually point to, right? So I end up drawing from a lot of these different models whenever I just need a source of inspiration, whenever I need to like be thinking about the problem from a different perspective, I'll like use COM-B as like the checklist, or I'll use the 15 like different ones on Make It like as the checklist to just kind of check myself and see, did I think about the problem in these ways to like help me frame the problem in different ways and like discover new solutions. So, but yeah, I do a lot of human-centered design kind of as a standard process. And then the pressures model is my like core foundational, and then I can't point to what the theories are that like inform the rest of my diagnosis or form the rest of my like insight generation, because it has become this like weird amalgamation of lots of things I've read over the years, right? So
yeah, I think one of the things that was interesting to me about the debate, Jared, that you sort of prompted from people was, it was interesting to me how many people were using studies as evidence versus studies as analogy, right? And so, to Theis's point, a lot of the time you're drawing all this academic knowledge as a analogy to help a group of people understand a thing, right? Rather than like, this is evidence that support that this framework is better. It's just, this is an analogy that helps people understand what the hell this framework is trying to get them to understand. Jared, ranker of rankers, what are you using these days?
It really depends on the part of the process that we're talking about. So often what I do is in the initial setup, as I'm trying to just get people familiar with what behavioral science is, I'll use maybe FOG to just kind of explain, hey, look, we're going to look for things that are motivating. We're going to look for some friction. We're going to look for things that make it easier, things that demotivate. We're going to look at this behavior and also the opposing behavior to see if we can, we don't have to just motivate the behavior we want. We can also demotivate the behavior we don't want. And I think that provides just like a nice framework so that people can kind of figure out, okay, this is what we're trying to do. But then once we get a little bit further into the process, they need something, and this is why I'm so confused about how opposing forces can do this, is I feel like at some point they're like, okay, but like, what are the ways you can motivate someone? And so I feel like I have to be more specific at that. And that's where I start bringing in make it. But I don't ever bring in all 15 because I think that's just way too overwhelming. So that's where I kind of bring in the opportunity solution tree to kind of figure out which of these 15 is most relevant. So I'm working on a project right now that's about, getting this people to complete this survey, and then they get this report, and how do you make this report compelling? And it's like, if I just said, hey, everyone, how do we make this report motivating? I feel like they would just give me dumb stares because like, I don't know how to do that. But if you said, how do you make it attractive? How do you make it meaningful? How do you make it unexpected, intriguing, goal-oriented? Once you get it really concrete like that, then it becomes like, oh, okay, now I know what I need to do design-wise to actually implement it. And then finally, once I kind of have a framework, I usually identify 3 or 4 make it statements. They're like, here's the thing that we were trying to do across this product. And it's more of a strategy than a specific, here's this one behavior we're going after. Once we've hit that stage, then I'll often reference 10 conditions for change, which is not one we've talked about so far, because it's just so comprehensive. I would never use it for actually organizing a project, but it's such a great reference. There's so much little info and details, and just to kind of like make sure I'm not missing anything important. I think it's a good resource.
Yeah, one of the things that really, for me, highlights out of what you said is there's a huge difference between trying to create something tabula rasa from whole cloth and trying to get to a quick answer that's probably good enough to make a thing happen, right?
Yeah.
A lot of why I end up using competing pressures is I'm generally working in truly unknown spaces, right? We don't really understand what's happening. It's a hard behavior change. Like I'm not doing a lot of easy behavior change. I'm doing the things that are like right here at the very edge of people are generally saying this is impossible. Like if you think about Clover Health, all the things that came to my team were things that the rest of the company thought couldn't be done. You cannot switch people's PCP preference. It is a given in medicine that people want who they want, and like you can't switch that. And so the answer is likely not something that comes from a list, but something that you have to genuinely go and observe people who are doing it and try and draw out in it, to draw out of it. That's very different than like, hey, this is reasonable ground that lots of people have tread. We have some generalized thing, and what I'm trying to do is remind myself of all the things that have worked across. It's almost like a meta-analysis or something, right? Where you're sort of like, across all of the times that we've tried to do this, here are the 10-ish things that have sort of floated up, which doesn't really work if it's something that's super sort of edge of the envelope, but works really well right in the core. And that's huge. I mean, I hadn't thought about that ahead of time, but it is part of my preference on frameworks has to do with the fact that I'm doing work mostly over here, not over here.
Yeah, something I've talked about multiple times, and it usually resonates with behavioral scientists, which is that oftentimes when our clients come to us, they're not saying, hey, here's this behavior, how do we change it? They're saying, I think I need behavioral science, but I don't know what behavioral science is. Can you tell me? So, like,
Are they even saying that? If
yeah.
they're even saying that, that's impressive.
Yeah.
Are they calling it behavioral health? Because
Yes.
that's my
Like,
issue.
the problem is they have this problem and they know it has something to do with psychology, but they're so confused about how to even think about the problem. And that's what I find so compelling about frameworks is that what we're doing, like we kind of sometimes simplify and say, oh, we're just like coming up with strategies, but really what we're doing is framing the problem for the client in a way that they can be like, oh, okay, here's how we handle this. And like ultimately the best framework is whichever framework is going to help you frame that problem, that mess of we have this issue and we don't even know how to think about it, to, okay, you've gotten me to the point where now I just have to ask myself, how do I make it easy? How do I make it tangible? And that's why I like the make it, because it gets it to that really concrete level of like, the problem is so well framed at this point that I can just say, here's like this very specific thing that you have to do that every person with some design experience knows how to do. You don't have to have behavioral science background. You don't have to know the theory. You don't have to think about intrinsic motivation or extrinsic motivation or any of this kind of stuff, or whether it replicates. Just how do you make it tangible?
I love that. All right, we're at the top of the hour. We're going to do around the horn. You've all been such great guests. You know, you all have so much experience in the field. What I want to hear is, what is the one discussion that you are interested in having right now in behavioral science? If somebody was going to reach out and have a beer with you and have a conversation about something, what is the debate? What's the conversation? What's the part that is like at the edge that you're thinking about a lot these days and are, you know, sort of have an internal motivation to talk about, right? Not because the field requires it, but because you're just fascinated. And I'm going to go straight down underneath me because I just had pizza with you and we had all sorts of great discussions. Steph Habif, what is your like current take me for a beer and talk to me about behavioral science thing?
Well, I think for me, and what I've always thought about and will probably always think about, is what can we do to actively participate in enhancing the field of expertise out in industry. That's a big soapbox of mine, has been for a long time. And so I think, you know, behavioral science now has a label, right? It's a thing. We're all here. There's a nice conglomerate of humans around the planet with this expertise that are out there doing really exciting work. And we still have a massive brand problem. And so I would obsessively talk about that to anybody who wants to. And I'm finally writing my first book, and the book is on health behavior design. And how do we go about our branding and evolving our brand in a way that, you know, works for everybody? More and more, as I talk about health behavior design, the design community is like, what the hell, you know, like what? So so I think that's all just opportunity space. I mean, our field is still so at the beginning of coalescing. There's just so much white space still. So constantly thinking about how we can actively contribute in a meaningful way to the brand that is
Buy me a
behavioral.
beer and talk about brand. I love it. All right.
Yes.
Ian Brownell, buy me a beer and talk about.
Well, I want the book. I can't wait to read that. That sounds great. Seems really relevant where I'm doing. Love to hear that. But I'd say for me, I think, you know, it's gonna be the thing, it's gonna be the AI. It's you know, it's here, it's not going away. How does it, you know, help us as a field to do our job better? And maybe even expand, you know, behavioral science being used by more people because it's more accessible in that way. So I think the AI, but with that naturally falls just sort of the ethical concerns. And I think recently been really thinking like, you know, are there with behavioral scientists, both like good and bad. Some of sort of the like been thinking a lot of like how much should we question pushing certain like using behavioral science and being persuasive in some categories versus others. You know, it's hard for me to see some of the way behavioral science is being used. But also love to see it being used in like the health behaviors way. So it's all
All
the
right, buy
things.
me a beer and talk to me about AI and ethics.
Mhm.
This is good. Buy me a beer and talk about brand. Buy me a beer and talk about behavior and ethics. Chloe Mon, buy me a beer and talk about.
I was going to say I'm a little bit with Eden on the AI, but in particular, I've seen a lot of, for me at least, a lot of requests are coming to me. Can you help us build like an AI coaching app that changes people's behavior? And I'm like, I just want to just have and also combined with my answer is I'm in Australia and I feel like a little bit isolated sometimes. I know there's some good behavioral scientists around, but I feel so envious of like everyone who's can have pizza with behavioral scientists in the rest of the world. So I really, because it's prominent now, I want to talk about like how do we do this? How do we think about AI, particularly when it comes to coaching apps, and how do we think about testing it and which of our frameworks work, which ones don't? Because I'm feeling a little bit like I've got some experience, but more like out of my depth here. I'm like, I don't know what it's going to do. I don't
I
want it to
really
go
want to talk with
haywire.
you
How do
about that. So I will buy you a
Amazing. Thank you.
beer.
Great.
We do it this
Done.
time
Virtual
next
beer sorted.
Yeah. I mean, there's a race to the effective AI coach, right? That race is
Yeah. And
on
there's,
and healthy. It's very alive.
yeah. And I'm like, I can't, yeah. I mean, I've got like 3 requests in the last 3 weeks and I'm like, okay, we need to come together and
All right.
talk about it. Thank you.
Man, this is gonna make us go down a rabbit hole because Look, we can't even get non-AI coaches to work. Like the efficacy of non-AI coaches
I
ain't great. Why would we like, yeah, we'll go straight to AI for the thing that even humans can't figure out.
I
Jeff
know.
Peterson, buy me a beer and talk about.
So I think there's kind of two things that I'm really curious about. One is that we're kind of moving away from the more academic approach, which is like run this very rigorous RCT on one behavior. And increasingly, I think we're moving towards a more behavioral strategy rather than just behavioral science. And we're often doing a lot more than just doing a single behavior. And I think a lot of our paradigms and frameworks and the way we're thinking about it is kind of still stuck in that we are running an experiment to get a result. And I think it's just become more than that. And I'm curious how the field is transitioning. I feel like it's happening, but not very consciously. And I feel like that's a debate I would like to have. And the other thing I would like is kind of my personal background here is that I was trained in the tradition of Kahneman and Tversky and behavioral economics, but I've kind of grown a little disillusioned with the biases approach. And it seems like the field is also moving away from biases in general. It feels like that's the case, and there's a lot of criticism. And I now work with Gary Klein, who's the founder of a field called naturalistic decision making, where we study expertise, working a lot with like firefighters and law enforcement, stuff like that. And I'm curious how we can bring the field beyond just behavioral economics. Like we've already got some marketing, we've got anthropology and sociology. We have all of these academic backgrounds that are coming in, but that transition is slow. It's a little bit weird. Some of us are still like very much promoting biases, and other of us are very hesitant to even talk about them anymore. I think that's a broader conversation I'd like to see in the field.
Buy me a beer and talk to me about behavioral design / behavioral strategy or behavioral systems, right? That's starting to be a term there, right? And then buy me a beer and talk to me about biases. I like the rhyming that's going on. Buy me a beer and talk to me about brand. Buy me a beer and talk to me about biases. Teis Jorgensen, giant human who can consume many beers. Dane, expectant father, all the things. What am I going to buy you a beer and talk to you about when I see you?
I mean, I feel like we're not going to be talking about behavioral science, honestly. There's so many other things to talk about, right? That like if I'm drinking the beer, we're probably talking improv comedy or board games, right? Let's be honest. So but to follow the original prompt, I've had some really interesting conversations. I'm navigating different geographic markets as well, and kind of thinking about like what does behavioral science mean in the European market versus in the American market, and what are people buying and what are people interested in terms of like frameworks and stuff like that. So that's probably the topic I've had social chats over most, is just figuring out like how to bring behavioral science from the TED Talk stage or from the like keynote speaker stage into the like standard operating procedure for a product team, right? And into the like day-to-day decision making for the designers, the engineers, the marketing folks who are all thinking about how to like actually drive real value. Because I think there's like behavioral science still has that like sheen and sexiness of like a cool new field with like a new way of thinking about things, right? And so a lot of people like want to bring the speaker in to like talk about it, and then the like emphasis beyond that to then actually like start applying and like bringing expertise is sometimes present and sometimes not as much. So I'm curious about kind of that like as a field of practice, right? Like how are we positioning ourselves, to Steph's point, and like thinking more about like what are the unique value adds that this brings, especially as a generalist such as myself. Like I end up drawing upon lots of different disciplines in here. And so I'm constantly thinking about like what is the thing that actually is a new way of problem framing, is a new way of solving, is a new way of actually like operationalizing change that then drives that long-term impact as well.
Getting our methods into an SOP is such a big win. I cannot celebrate that idea enough. Like that's not a small thing.
Yeah, it's
Love
pretty,
I know. government's rubbed off on me with SOPs. Let me tell
Yeah,
you.
well,
Yeah.
regulated medical, I mean, Eden knows that too in healthcare, everything regulated, so everything is, yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting. You know, I feel like I've come full arc, right? Because I started out as a head of product, like chief product officer, where it's a very embedded version of behavioral science, and then really campaigned hard for, you know, CBOs and behavioral science teams, and, you know, doing that at Clover and really pioneering that sort of more disciplined at the edge, Jared, right? Like the like truly, we have no idea how to solve this problem. Everyone else thinks it's impossible. Let's find like the novel thing that will allow us to do a thing that nobody else has been able to do. And now I'm back in a CXO role, right? Where it's extraordinarily operational. You know, it's trying to convince a team full of leaders to be able to do that. You know, I could tell them what to do because I'm their boss, right? I can like impose structure onto this thing. How do I get them to be able to have this habit of mine and do it every day? I mean, I think that's a great beer topic. Well, look, what a great, I mean, this is the first time we've done a non-individual like conversation and
Wait, did you answer the question?
No, because I'm the moderator. It's great.
Well, okay, so the next time I take you out for a beer, what are we talking
We'll
about?
find out. I don't know. I guess probably the psycho piece. Like, what is it to try and be a CXO doing behavioral science rather than a behavioral scientists all up? And, you know, how do you not, rather like Chloe, I'm feeling a little out of touch with the field in that Jared, I don't want to have some of these esoteric conversations. I'm going to block Elena, who's going to yell at, like, I don't want to do that. Like, I have so many other things. I actually really liked Teis's answer, which is, it's highly likely that with any of you, if we went out for a beer, we probably wouldn't talk about that much behavioral science because there's so much going on in the world, and behavioral science is so much of who we are. We don't really need to externalize behavioral science. It is the viewpoint that we bring to board games and other things. So, I mean, in some ways, I want to talk about anything but behavioral science. I want to talk about this messy world and this messy moment that we live in. You know, I don't drink the beer, but I'll have the conversation.
Yeah, but behavioral science plays a role in helping with the mess.
It does, but I want to talk about the mess and not the behavioral. You know, I want to talk about cleaning up, not the broom I'm using to do it. This is super fun. We got to do more special edition N of sixes here because N of one is a really lovely format, and I love to hear all your individual stories. And I recommend that, you know, for anybody hearing this, each of these people has done an episode where they've walked us through their journey. So if you're interested in their perspective and how they came to what they're telling you here, you can hear how they got here, right? We all got here through very different paths. You know, Jared was talking about sort of, you know, the sort of behavioral economics common and Tversky version, which is very different than the sort of route that Teis came through in design thinking and research and things, and Ideas 42. Like, all of us got here in a different way, and I love the variety of perspectives. Thank you so much for giving me your time and giving people your time and leading this field because, you know, to Steph's point, fields take leading, right? It isn't, if we just leave it to evolve on its own, it will inevitably get in the suck hole of, you know, LinkedIn comments about esoteric navel gazing, internal. And if we don't make this external, if we don't use it to change the world, if we don't deal with the messy situation that we're in through this lens that we have, what a waste. What a missed opportunity. So thanks to every single one of you. Jared, thank you for writing this and getting us all kicked off. So special thanks to you. And I will see you again on the next episode of N equals 6, or however many behavioral scientists we manage to get together in a room. Maybe we'll do it over beers. Anybody in San Diego, we can make the beers happen. Thank you so much for being here. Thanks, everybody.